I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. Throughout my career, I've had side hustles, some of which have turned into real businesses. But first and foremost, I'm a serial technology entrepreneur. In the creator space, we hear plenty of advice on how to hustle harder and why you can sleep when you're dead. On this show, we ask new questions in hopes of getting new answers. Questions like, how can small businesses work smarter? How do you achieve balance between work and family? How can we redefine success in our businesses so that we don't burn out after year 3? Every week, I sit down with business founders at various stages of their side hustle to small business journey. These entrepreneurs are pushing the envelope while keeping their values. Keep listening for conversation, context, and camaraderie. Jennifer Stine founded her business, Fortune Web Marketing, in 2007. 15 years later, Jennifer's company has grown to become a full-service internet marketing company with 18 employees. Here today to share the story of her business and share more about how she balances life, family, and her team is Jennifer Stine. Jennifer, welcome to the show. I'm excited to have you on today.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. I appreciate you guys.
So let's start with giving just a little bit of background about who you are and where you come from to the listeners.
Okay. So my name, like you mentioned, is Jennifer, also known as Jenny. So if you call me Jenny, I will not be offended at all. And actually, I was born and raised in New Jersey, went to school at Penn State, got my master's from NYIT, worked in the financial services industry in New York City for a very long time, maybe 11 years, and then decided that didn't want to do that anymore. So we decided to start Fortune Web Marketing. So, now we have 4 offices from coast to coast, 18 people, pretty much 7 departments within, and a brand new video and live stream production company as well.
Awesome. So 11 years working for kind of a big company. What was it that made you say, hey, this isn't for me. It's time to move on?
So it was 11 years with that one company. And before that, I would say it was probably 5 or 6 years in Philly, other companies in the New York City metro area as well. But the reason that I left, it's really not the most positive story. But being a young woman in the financial services industry working on New York City, there were a lot of hardships, against women in the workplace, right? So It just got to the point where, I can't really complain. I had a million different mentors, along the way, but it got to the point where you just realized, unless you did something completely drastic in that industry, in that city, surrounded by the people you were surrounded with, things weren't going to change. And I realized I had way more potential than they were allowing many, many women in my company to have. So I decided that I was going to achieve that potential and start my own business.
Yeah. So what is it that made you think the path for you at that point was starting your own business instead of saying, hey, I need to find another job at a place that values me better?
I think I'm very strong-willed and I'm very independent. And I figured I could do a lot better job if I didn't have the restraints and constrictions and the low ceilings that most people are given, especially women at that time in the corporate world. So I kind of wanted to just break out of all of that and see what potential I really had inside of myself.
Yeah. Did you have a model of entrepreneurship like in the family? Is somebody else in your family an entrepreneur? Did you do anything entrepreneurial as you were growing up?
Well, I mean, I think I always had a job since I was like 11, right? So I've always had that work ethic, but my father does own a small business. He's actually an antiquarian book dealer, meaning that he sells first editions, antique books, signed copies, things of that nature. So he's always had his own business since I was about 2 or 3, So other than that, my mother was a teacher and a social service director. And, my stepfather grew up in the Board of Education and being a teacher and social services worker himself. So no, I really didn't have many entrepreneurs in the family except for my dad.
Yeah. Did you ever work in the bookstore? Did you ever help out there?
Yes, I did work in the bookstore. I did. There's a little tiny beach town along the Jersey Shore called Ocean Grove. And he had a store there to start. Then he moved it back downtown to Asbury Park, next town over. here on the Jersey Shore, and I worked in both places. Very
Yeah.
interesting. You learn a lot. I'm very good at like literature categories on Jeopardy.
That's great. So I got to ask you, so a lot of people, especially when they're kids, they work in stores, retail or not, they end up hating those things. So I got to ask you, do you still love the smell or hate the smell of books?
I love it so much that I refuse to read a book on any type of ebook platform, like a Kindle, for example. I need to feel it. I need to smell it. I need to touch it. And I just think it would be complete disrespect if I went the ebook route, to my father.
Well, I got to say, I do read ebooks as well, but there is something definitely different when you've actually got a physical, because I read physical books too. There's something different about that and the experience of it and how much you kind of glean out of the book versus digitally. But okay, I think we could talk about books for a long time, but let's get back to your business. So you said something interesting before. You said we started this, so it sounds like it's not just you that started this business. Do you have a co-founder or somebody else that helped you along the way?
I did. I had a co-founder when we first started for only about 2 years, and then we separated the companies. I was running his software company and doing marketing for his other businesses as well. And we sort of parted ways when we realized the direction was different. But I think I will always say we, because I don't consider my companies mine. I consider them my colleagues. And that's another word people might not use to describe their staff or employees, but they're my colleagues. They don't work for me. They work with me. And this is ours, not mine.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that mindset. It's a great way of thinking about the team that you're on, because it really is a team when you're in the early days, especially. So let's talk about those early days when you jumped off to do this. This was your first time starting a company. How did you get started? Like, how did you find clients? How did you decide that this is what you wanted to do, that you wanted to do marketing and you also did software, it sounds like? How did you decide those things?
Well, I've always done marketing almost from day one, even in Philadelphia, New York City, et cetera. Honestly, it was my business partner at the time was in an industry that needed a lot of marketing help, a lot of marketing help. It was more like on the distribution supply side of things, like office supplies, office furniture, break room supplies, that type of thing. And at the time, there was over 3,000 independent dealers just in the US, not even including Canada. And they didn't have websites, they did not have a marketing plan. They were still like door to door, here's your big catalog this thick and fax your orders in or call them to me, So we kind of hit that industry first. And that is still a huge cornerstone of our business to this day, that supply side distribution angle, on the B2B sector of things. But it was just a lot of work. I was thrown into speaking gigs and educational seminars across the US, and that wasn't my thing. And now I can do it with my eyes closed. I was thrown into sales, again, wasn't my thing, but I think I'm okay at it now, so just a lot of hard work and, being terrified of failing at something like the sales and the training sessions across the US. That scared me, but you have to do it, right? It's your baby. You want to make this successful. And I was not going back to the Wall Street, New York City corporate world. So just threw myself into it, learned from my mistakes, celebrated the successes, and moved on.
Did you make a clean break from working and then starting this up, or did they overlap for any period of time?
Clean break, which was also terrifying because I took about a 50% pay cut as well.
Yeah. So how did you fund it then initially? Did you have a client already lined up, or?
It was my business partner at the time. Really, he gave me a laptop and said, go, so there were some people on his end that helped with accounting, and I learned all about that, on my own as well. Started doing my books by myself. I grew up teaching myself how to code and all these search engine optimization techniques. So whenever we could hire part-time people, I would train them and then they would come on full time. But it was a huge pay cut for several years, and I took my laptop and I went.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So how did you, so it's 15 years now that you've built it up. Obviously those first couple of years were really tough. how did you figure out like that whole process of, which one do I do first? Do I go find a client? Do I hire people? Like, how do I piece together all of these pieces? Because it's almost a chicken and egg problem, right? You go get a
Mhm.
client, but then you don't have the people to serve it. But if you have the people to serve it and you don't have a client, you can't pay them. And, like
Mhm.
all of these things are interrelated. So how did you think about kind of that continuum?
In the beginning, it was really easy. I needed to find clients because I knew I could do it all. Right. And then again, it was just long, long days and really, starting it. But our focus when we first started was really, you know, search engine optimization, paid advertising on the Google ads, Bing ad side, all stuff that I'm certified in and know how to do. I know how to code. I know how to write. Actually, writing is my passion. One day I will become an author, right? But not yet. So
And
really, it
somebody
was
will
finding
collect the
clients.
first edition of that book somewhere in some bookstore.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe I'll sign it too. Um, but yeah, it was just find clients and then service them. It didn't take long before we were able to get. We hired interns at first, and honestly, that was really our strategy: is find interns, and from there we train them. You really can't even back then. It was even more difficult than today. There's not a lot of options for like an online marketing degree, right? Even the classes that you take in college are like they're wildly ineffective, even to this day. Like they'll teach you principles and about buyer personas, but you sit somebody down who's getting their degree in online marketing and say, build me a Google ads campaign. And they have no idea what you're talking about. They're like, oh, well, I did a simulation of it. I'm like, that's not going to help here and probably not ever. Right. So,
Right.
it really was get interns and train them. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
And then eventually they
Yeah.
became part-time and then they became full-time.
Yeah, that's great. So you said something there, talking about, and this is a normal story of founders, is those long days that end up happening, especially in the early days. How did you think about that in terms of your own wellness and sleep and exercise and fitting these in? And how has that changed from then to now?
So didn't really think of that much. I was young back then and just going, going, going. Always found time to try to like take a vacation here or there, a couple of days off or an hour off, every so many days. But I am not the best at that. I am not going to lie. Not at all. And ever since the pandemic, we've had some business changes and business circumstances right before the pandemic as well. So for the last 5 years, there really hasn't been too much of a focus on myself. Anything that time I do have for goes right into my son and my family. I always like to say, people that own a business don't take vacations. We might travel and we might, throw an extra day here or there, but we are always on. We're always getting texts. We're always getting emails. We can't not check our email, the buck stops with you, so, unless it's like a physical store, you can hang the thing on the door. And even then you're not really off, you've got orders you need to place for the next week or, whatever the case might be. So I like to say, entrepreneurs really never get time off, and that's okay, because we can make our own schedule. But coming out of the pandemic, it's been rough. You do try to make time for yourself as much as possible. And I think I should be back on track with that by the end of the year, but it is not my strong suit at all. So,
Yeah. I think this is definitely a common story with founders and entrepreneurs, because you're exactly right. It's tough. Like, I've gone on family vacations and it's like, I still have to take my laptop with me because, if I don't, and I come back after even a couple of days or a week or 2 weeks, it's unbearable. It's just how much it would take, weeks and weeks to dig out from, and probably things
yep.
have gotten missed in the interim. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you think about those boundaries then? Like you talked about spending time with your son and family. Like, what does that mean? Do you make sure that, hey, I don't check my phone during dinner? Like what are the things that are like, these are bright lines for me that this is a boundary that I'm not going to cross?
So we definitely don't use our phones during dinner. We try not to use our phones right before, my son's bedtime, not saying I don't get online, and start working after he goes to bed. I do. We do have a family little ritual during dinner where we watch Jeopardy. My son is 10, but he loves Jeopardy and he's actually pretty good at it. Sometimes he even beats me. And I'm just like, phew, what are you going to be like when you're like 18 or even 16 or 13 for that matter, you know? But we try to we always put our phone downs at meals. You know, if we do a lot of like hiking in the woods and, you know, vacations and stuff. And I would say it's hard to keep your phone down because that's where our cameras are and everything is documented through that, you know, but we try to limit screens when we're doing things together as a family.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. It sounds like he should maybe start getting ready for the college Jeopardy thing, right? Don't they have that? I think they've got
Yes,
college
they
Jeopardy.
still do. Yeah, they used to have
I don't.
kids Jeopardy and we looked into it. They don't do that anymore, but he's like, "Oh, I could do this in college." I'm like, "Yes, you can." Yeah.
That's what I was going to say. I vaguely remember the kids Jeopardy thing, but I haven't seen it in a long time. So
Hmm.
it sounds like he's getting ready for that. So let's talk about how you kind of scale this business. You're at now the point where you've got offices all through the U.S. And obviously it was very different from when you started. You know, it was just basically you and maybe a partner and kind of getting going. What kind of systems or apps or technologies have you put in place to help you kind of make that transition and grow over time?
Um, I think across both companies, we have really great project management systems. We also have, I'm going to tell you, like really, really great managers of each department who are fantastic at just project managing and keeping everything in check. So I would say our project management systems, on the video production side of things, we really invested in a lot of like brand new Sony cameras. We're migrating to Mondays. The project management system, which is really good for video editing and video production. And we have, you know, Sling Studio and Restream.io for our streaming capabilities. And we're actually probably moving to like a more live view. I don't know if you've ever heard of that LIVEU model, for a lot of our video production and streaming services. And honestly, you know, with us, it's honestly about the project management, right? Because we have to know how to code and build in 25 different web development systems from WordPress to Shopify and everything, you know, in between. So for us, it's the project management software. We use a plethora of email marketing tools. We use we use a lot of scheduling tools for social media. We use a lot of competitive analysis tools from Raven to SpyFu to SEMrush for the search marketing side of things. So it's really like a whole conglomerate of tools.
Yeah. So what's interesting in kind of what you said is it sounds like this has been a transition over time. But when you got started, like a lot of these tools that I think you mentioned did not exist, right? So how did you piece it together back then? Was this just a manual effort, or that's exactly what it was?
Exactly what it was. We're talking like Alta Vista was still around when I got started. Did I just date myself?
Yep. Hey, I
So
loved Alta
yeah.
Vista too. It was a great
Mhm.
search engine.
Yeah. You know, I mean, we've been through a couple, like a perfect example of that, I think would be like online quoting tools, right? We
Mhm.
used to do like all of our proposals were manual, right? We just wrote them and I would save templates and try to create templates and back then content blocks, but they were just in like Word docs, you know, saved as this is this service, this is this service, right? And it would just be a PDF that you would fax and, you know, sign and fax over, or, you know, they would hand it to you right there and you'd be like, well, can I take a photocopy? Right. You know, so it was just things like that. You know, now we've been through about 3 different, you know, online quoting tools. All of our contracts are there. You know, even our employee handbooks and everything that needs to be signed is signed and executed online from internally, you know, so it's just, it's finding the right tools that won't break the bank that are actually good, right? We're in a predicament now with our new software, our quoting software tool, and it's terrible. So, you know, you always find that not every solution works for you and you have to find different ones.
Yeah. I will say, you know, I've been surprised when I've run into people that run businesses that are traditionally not viewed as very forward and enabled. that are using some of the things that we use in some of these other businesses like DocuSign and things like that. And I'm like, oh, it really tells you something about the folks that are running those businesses, that they're embracing these things that their colleagues and competitors are not.
Hmm.
So another thing that you kind of mentioned that I think is super important for founders is your project managers and finding the right people. So is there something that you do in terms of trying to find those right people? Is there interview tricks that you do, or like finding and hunting down the right person, even if they're not looking for jobs? Like, what do you do to find the right people for your business?
Oh, well, I'm just going to start this whole part of this conversation with, let me tell you how hard it is to find the right people nowadays. It's near impossible. And you kind of think, okay, well, it's not, and I hate to say this, they might not be ideal, or they're not getting taught the right stuff in school. So I'm going to have to train them from the start, or it's that, those generational stereotypical mentalities that are out there, and they exist, for a reason. They're very real. But when, we do go through a pretty rigorous process. So I stopped doing the initial interviews ages ago because it was frustrating, and it was a waste of my time initially. So the managers of our departments will interview. Nothing gets posted for a job opening without me giving approval, on the description and everything like that, requirements, all of that, salary. They will screen and interview first, and then they come to me. And if they pass the Jennifer test, we actually give them a test, right? So say it's social media. We'll give them 3 very different clients and have them write posts, create an image, and suggest ads and suggest changes to their social pages of what they think could be done better. If it's a content writer, we will give them a blog post or a landing page to write. And it's pretty easy to kind of sort out the bad from the good right at that moment. Some people get it done in 2 days, other people take a week. And after that, we just don't even bother, and you can get that actual physical work back, and you have a really good sense of, their style, their vibe, if they would fit, with certain clients that you have or in certain verticals. So really it's that test that kind of drives it home for each candidate that we bring in for an interview.
Yeah. Is this something that you implemented early on in kind of the life cycle, or is this something that you kind of figured out as you were going?
Definitely figured out as we were going. They'd send you samples of their work, which, to be honest with you, might not be their work all the time, right? And that became pretty evident.
Right.
So I would say we probably implemented this about 7 years ago, 7, 8 years ago,
Okay.
but it wasn't something we did for like the first half of the company's existence. And then as soon as we did that, it was one of those things like, why weren't we doing this the entire time? Like, it would have saved so much heartache from like onboarding and payroll and HR and interviewing and training. Like, if we just would have done this in the beginning. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things that seems obvious in retrospect, but that's probably what tells you it was a good idea.
hmm
It just took you a little while to find it.
yep.
So, thinking about where you are now, you probably, I mean, in 15 years, you've got a lot of lessons, and probably the same thing in terms of, um, what you were before you became an entrepreneur. What is it that if you could go back and talk to your pre-founder, pre-entrepreneurial self, what would you tell that person about what they should do?
Uh, don't take as much crap for as long of a time. I mean, no, really, I don't. I think that would be the only lesson to myself. Like, don't stay somewhere that you're not happy and you're not being treated well, right? Other than that, I don't think I would change anything. And a lot of times you'll get asked this question in interviews, and I don't think I would change a thing, because everything you do, whether it turns out disastrous and it was a mistake or it was wildly successful, you learn from that. So I don't think I would go back and do really quite anything differently.
Yeah. Yeah. How is that experience of being honestly treated poorly as an employee informed how you have built systems to treat your employees now, your colleagues now, not your employees?
Yeah, my colleagues. It's like the founding principle of this organization. Like that's what we treat everybody very well. We don't talk down to people. We don't discriminate. We don't do anything like that. Like not even like it. It's a founding principle. It's what drives us, right? And I always say that we are the most non-corporate, professional, and driven organization you will ever work with. We have graffiti on our walls. We have marquees, hanging from actual boardwalk boards, right? We go out for team activities and dinners, and we go to music concerts and festivals, and we are driven. We are passionate about what we do. We are really good at what we do, but this is not a stuffy corporate environment and will never be.
Yeah. Yeah. What's the last team event that you all did together?
What's the last team event that we all did together? I want to say it was probably a concert,
Yeah.
So we do, we live in a music town, or where our main headquarters, Asbury Park, New Jersey, is a music town, So it's been tough to get everybody together at one time. Some of our employees are in Arkansas and Kentucky and of course Cali, which is our office out there. So whenever we do have majority of people here, we'll try to go do dinner or happy hour or some sort of like team building or just hanging out activity. But especially since COVID, it's like impossible. So, So, and then, a bunch of our employees will tag along when we do our trade shows and our speaking seminars, and we always do fun stuff there. I always say when in Rome. So whether it be, Vegas or Orlando or Chicago, we're going to go trip around for at least a few hours a day and show them a good time and show them the city that we're in.
That's great. That's great. Mm-hmm. Okay. So last question for you. Somebody that's thinking about taking this leap to turn their kind of idea into a side hustle or their side hustle into a full-time, business, what advice would you give them?
It's a lot of work. And I'm not sure that's a piece of advice, but if you want it badly enough, you have to work for it, right? And once you do come out the other end and you see, wow, I created that and I can do this and this is mine and I have that control over where it goes, and I can make this happen. It's probably the best feeling, but if, you just got to work for it, and it's a lot brighter on the other side. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Jennifer, last question. Where can our listeners find and connect with you?
Well, I have LinkedIn is probably the best bet. Speaking of that work-life balance, I made all the other social channels private, so you're not going to get me there. But the website is fortunewebmarketing.com, and I'm also on LinkedIn as Jennifer Ray Stine. And of course, the company has all of our social profiles as well.
That's awesome. Thanks a lot for being on the show, Jennifer.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Side Hustle to Small Business podcast, powered by Hiscox. To learn more about how Hiscox can help protect your small business through intelligent insurance solutions, visit hiscox.com. That's HISCOX.com. And if you have a story you want to hear on this podcast, please visit hiscox.com/share your story. I'm your host, Sanjay Parekh. You can find me on Twitter at Sanjay, that's SANJAY, or on my website at sanjayparekh.com.